Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Heartbeat, an Inter Miami daily podcast. And today we're talking about a report from yesterday from César Luis Merlo, who is a transfer specialist when it comes to Latin America, that Inter Miami is interested in Puebla defender Gastón Silva. Silva from Uruguay, 30-year-old. This is a player that, according to Merlo, is interested in, or Inter Miami is interested in having replaced Nico Freire this summer. Fits a very similar profile to Nico Freire and solves a lot of the same challenges that I think that Inter Miami was trying to solve when they signed Freire. And so I'm going to talk about him today. And I'm also going to talk about what this news probably likely means for Inter Miami in a bigger picture sense, because I do think that whether we sign this player or not, there's some interesting conversations about what this means for Inter Miami this summer and moving forward. Gastón Silva is a Uruguayan, has played for the national team. He just turned 30. I'll talk a little bit about his, what he is as a player, but I've never seen him play a game, so I, take all of this with a grain of salt. It's just what I've been able to do in research over the last 12 hours. He currently plays for Puebla, which is in the Mexican league. He will, if he doesn't move this summer, he'll play Inter Miami in the Leagues Cup. Inter Miami and Puebla are scheduled to face off against each other in the group stage of the Leagues Cup, and I believe that's the second game. So we might get a chance to see him up close, and actually, in reality, we could sign him after that. So we might get a close-up look at him on July 27th before we sign him, although I imagine that if we're going to make this guy our priority, we would have him by then. He just turned 30, so he's not young. He's definitely a veteran, which is a similar age profile to Nico Freire. He's about 6'1", so he's not huge, but he's very athletic. From what I can tell, he's got a very good vertical, which makes him very good in the air, very good on set pieces, good at defending set pieces, good at being a aerial threat, which is something that Inter Miami looked at very closely when they went out and got Nico Freire. As we saw with Freire, he's a very physical, big-bodied defender that can get up there and help on set pieces, that can be a weapon on set pieces in attack, but can also defend effectively. And I think that's something that Inter Miami's really looking for, because they really struggled with that last season and to a lesser extent this season. And so if there was one thing that Nico Freire was an obvious upgrade over Kamal Miller, it was his ability to play in the air, which just goes to show that Inter Miami really valued Freire's ability to be effective, in the air. So that's something that, it's now a pattern with this team. He's also left-footed, which means that, Tata Martino, I think, is looking for someone that has that left-footedness to play as a left center back. He's also played a little bit of left back in his career, Silva, and maybe is more even of a natural profile as a left back, or maybe, earlier in his career, he was a better profile as a left back. So you should expect him to be a solid athlete, a guy that is going to be able to be solid defensively, especially in one-on-one situations, better in transition, certainly than a guy like Sir Christoph. And he's a guy that's been around and should feel good leading a line, being in charge, being a good partner to Toto Aviles, because he has that experience. He did play with the Uruguay national team for 4 to 5 years in between 2014 and 2018. So when he was 20 to 24, let's be clear, this was a long time ago, but he did make 19 caps. He did get 19 caps with Uruguay, and he made it to the 2018 World Cup in Russia with the Uruguay national team. And so he's a guy that has been a lot of places and seen a lot of things and has a lot of experiences in this game. And so we should keep that in mind. He also spent a couple years in Europe. He signed with Torino in Italy back in, I believe, 2014. He spent 2 seasons in Italy with Torino. Did not make a tremendous impression. I think he had like 17 league games in 2 years. So Certainly not a significant contributor, although I'm not sure how much injury played a part in that. But then he went on loan to Granada in Spain, where he was a more solid contributor. He was more effective, played more games in that season than he did in 2 years at Torino. And so he's a guy that has at least been to Europe, had 3 years, got to experience it, got to be a part of that experience and got to fight for his place and all that. And so that is at least something that's good to see. After he left Torino, after his loan at Granada, he had a really interesting case, and I was trying to read more about it, but my Spanish is only okay, and so I think I might have missed some of the small details. But it sounds like he had an agreement with Pumas in Mexico to join them after leaving Torino. And then this was on like the 21st of July back in 2017. And then 10 days later, he just showed up and signed a contract with the Independiente in Argentina. And Pumas kind of looked at this situation and thought, what is going on? That became a real problem. And in fact, Pumas came out on the losing end of it. They still had to pay this transfer fee that they agreed to with Torino. And it was 1.6 million. And even after taking it to court, they were still forced to pay that transfer fee. Like I said, I'm sure there's more details to that someone who was fluent in Spanish would be able to track down. But yeah, it's just a footnote. Doesn't really matter now, but something that is interesting. After a couple years at Independiente in Argentina, he spent a season at Huesca and Cartagena. And then finally, he does make the move to Mexico in the summer of 2022, where he lines up with Puebla, which has not been phenomenal over the last couple years. Just for clarity and openness, he played for Puebla this past season in the Clausura. He was one of their left center back. And that was the worst team in the Clausura, and they gave up the most goals by a significant margin. They gave up 43 goals during the Clausura, which is really bad. That's only, I think, 17 games. So tough. Let me just double check that while I have it up. And so this player is, struggling. I'm sorry. He's been on a team that's been struggling. They gave up 43 goals in 17 games, a minus 25 goal differential. So really bad. The next worst was 35 goals, and very few teams gave up more than 30 goals in the Clausura. So pretty bad from Puebla, and he was a starting left center back on that team. As you can imagine, a lot of Puebla fans are eager to see him leave, and so I don't know what that tells you. I will say I've never seen this player play, and so I don't know what his game is like. I don't know if he's a good choice. I think we saw a lot of similar comments about Nico Frede when we first signed him. Olympiacos fans were happy to see him go. I don't think Pumas fans were particularly sad to see him go to the MLS. And so, but Frede turned out to be a solid player and a guy that ended up having a really big impact while he was healthy. So maybe Gastón Silva will be the same. I also will say that the only Inter Miami / Uruguay fan I know, Daniel Solana, was very high on this player last night after these reports came out. He talked about how this guy would be an upgrade over Nico Frede. And so keep that in consideration too. A guy who's actually seen this player play on several occasions thinks that he's a really good, solid player and would help Inter Miami and would be something of an upgrade on Nico Frede, which would be nice. Okay, so what does this mean for Inter Miami? Actually, one other thing I wanted to mention, there was another report from Nico Bravo, who is also sort of a transfer rumor specialist. And he put out there yesterday that Inter Miami was interested in two defenders, and possibly signing two defenders, one from Mexico and one from Argentina. Obviously, Gastón Silva would be likely the player from Mexico. And then there's another player from Argentina. It wasn't clear if he thought that they would take one, sign one or the other, or if they would sign both. But interesting to keep in mind that Inter Miami is at least interested in signing 2 defenders this summer. And that is a good sign, I think. He also, in that article, mentioned that Nacho of Real Madrid is not particularly feasible right now. I think Inter Miami would definitely explore that possibility, but considering where he's at, I don't know if that's going to be feasible. I don't know if that's something that player would be interested in doing. And so those are the 3 little news reports from yesterday that I wanted to make sure that I brought out. But I do want to talk about what this means for Inter Miami more holistically. And, let's put Silva to the side, because yesterday was the first time we heard about him, and maybe Inter Miami is going to find quickly that it's not feasible or they have better options or whatever. And it's just a name and a conversation that happened, and then it made its way to a journalist. And so that's why Gastón Silva's name sort of popped up on our radar. But I do think it means a few things for Inter Miami more holistically that I do want to explore. The first is that this is proof that Inter Miami is working on a new summer center back signing to replace Nico Freire. I know that sounds obvious, but just because it looks obvious to fans doesn't mean the front office always feels the same way. They have a lot of money invested in Christoph. They have a lot of money invested in Toto Aviles. Maybe they feel that Ryan Saylor and Ian Frey are going to be suitable players for this team moving forward. And maybe they think Ian Frey is going to step in at a starter level. And so they might not need to sign a center back to replace Nico Freire. And that Freire is really the goal for Freire was to just get him to when Ian Frey came back healthy. I'm not sure. I don't think that makes a ton of sense from a fan's perspective, but you never really know what's going on in the minds of the front office and the coaching staff and the technical staff, because they get to see things on a daily basis that we don't. And so sometimes their thinking is significantly different than to what we are when we only get to watch the 90 minutes of game time. So this is, I think, good news to see that we are looking to and likely will sign a center back this summer to replace Nico Freire. The other thing that I think this implies is that they're not planning to use the third DP spot on a center back, at least not once. They might go out and get 2 center backs, but at least for the first center back, they're not planning on using that third DP spot. The MLS is changing their rules this summer so that teams can spend money on 3 true DPs and 3 U22 DPs. Up until this point, there was a rule that linked the DP spots and the U22 DP spots, whereas you could only have 2 full DPs if you wanted to use all 3 of your U22 DPs, or if you wanted to use all 3 of your regular DPs, you could only have 1 U22 DP. That rule was intended to ensure that teams weren't spending over the top. I don't know actually what that rule was for, but that's what the rule was when it was introduced in a couple of years ago, the U22 rules. They are doing away with that. Thankfully, MLS is making a positive step towards opening up their roster rules and making everything easier, making it easier for teams to go out and sign competitive players. And so that rule is changing this summer. What that meant roster building wise in the winter is that Leo Campana fit the narrow description of a third DP that allowed you to have all 3 U22 DPs. Campana was, it's because he's under the max TAM threshold. I don't want to have a whole conversation about allocation money, but he was just in this unique profile where he fit as a third DP, but also allowed you to have all 3 U22s, which we are using for Redondo, Diego Gomez, and Tota Aviles, and were using for Facu Farias before he got injured and we signed Redondo. So what does that mean? The rule change means that Inter Miami can use a third DP spot if they can get Leo Campana down from under the DP threshold. They can go out and sign another big player. For Leo Campana, that could mean he gets traded It could mean that we get some allocation money and we buy him down under the DP threshold and then we keep him, which I think is certainly a possibility. And I'll talk more about that tomorrow. But it also means that if Inter Miami wants to go get a big player, whether it's, any player you can think of, Antoine Griezmann, Neymar, Cristiano Ronaldo, Angel Di Maria, like whoever it is, they can do that with unlimited resources because of they'll have a DP spot open and will have the ability to do that. So how are they going to use that third DP spot? I don't think Inter Miami is in a world right now where they're not going to maximize their roster every single transfer window. So I do think they're going to find a way to buy down Leo Campana or move him so that they can open that third DP spot for a player they think is going to help them win the MLS Cup this season. That's sort of what Inter Miami's mantra is in the Messi era, because you're only going to have Messi for so long and you have to build the best possible team you can while he's here. And you have to take advantage of the fact that people will come to Inter Miami for a lesser financial package, because they want a chance to play with Messi. So I do think they're going to add a third DP. I do think it's going to be a big name player, but doesn't sound like it's going to be a center back, at least not the center back that replaces Nico Frede. So I do think that's a big takeaway, because Inter Miami could go out and sign, Rafael Varane as a free agent, a big name like that, right? Maybe not that specific player, but it doesn't sound like that's what their plan is, at least not for that left-sided spot where they are now attached to guys like Gastón Silva, who I don't believe would, cost that level of financial commitment. So that's the second big takeaway. And then the third thing I wanted to talk about regarding this story is that this is a player in Mexico, and Mexico is in their, off-season break between the Clausura and the Apertura, but it is the Mexican calendar is a lot more similar to the Americas. And I guess they have two big breaks every year, and this is one of them. But most of the leagues in North and South America are on a annual calendar, meaning they go from January to December or March to November or something like that, not on the European calendar where they start in the fall in August, September, and then go until April, May. So what that means is that in the winter window for the MLS, it's a lot easier to sign players from South America or other leagues in the Americas, because they're also on their off season. The Brazilian league is in their off season in January and December. The Argentine league, the same thing. And so if you want to sign a player from Argentina, it makes the most sense to do it at the end of that season. Same thing in Brazil, same thing in Colombia, same thing in Ecuador, etc. In Europe, if you want to sign a player in the winter, you have to take them from their team in the middle of the season, which is oftentimes a much more difficult sell for MLS teams, to get a player to leave in the middle of their season when they're competing, when they're trying to do something with their teammates. It's a lot easier when their contracts expire, which happens in the summer. It's a lot easier in the off season when teams are trying to reshape their rosters, which again happens in the summer. And so now that we're in the summer, we're looking at the summer window. I do think that there's going to be more talent available in the European markets. Now, listen, Gastón Silva might be a superstar, but I think Inter Miami, who has been very interested in signing players from South America since Tata Martino came. In fact, I think almost every player that they've signed has come from South America, other than Julian Gressel, who has a history of working with Tata Martino. Every single player, I think, has come from South America. In fact, let me just double check that, because it actually might be every player. Luis Suarez, Frede, Redondo, Chelo Wigant, Matías Rojas, Messi, who is from Barcelona but is South American. Same thing with Jordi Alba and Busquets. They worked with Tata Martino in the past. And then obviously Aviles, Facu Farias, and Diego Gomez all come from South America. And so this is clearly a Tata Martino-led initiative. They didn't do this when Phil Neville was in charge. So I'm very confident this isn't a Chris Henderson type move. And so I just want to keep them open to the possibility that the best talent and fit we can get for this spot might come from Europe and not from South America. And they should be open to that possibility, especially if they come from Spain, because you'll have the same language. You won't have a language barrier. And, I understand that that could be a problem, especially when you're talking about a defender that you want to have great communication with. So that's my last point. I don't want them to be married to the idea of, buying players from South America just because it's easier or because Tata Martino is comfortable with them, but to go out and get the best player. And this time of year, I would imagine that there's a much better chance that that player comes from Europe than from South America. And again, you do have this incredible ability to entice players to come over because of Lionel Messi. Players want to play with him. Players want to have a chance to experience what that's like. And so you're going to be able to get players that you wouldn't have normally been able to get, and you should be able to get them a little bit cheaper than their max profit would suggest. Anyways, guys, this was the story about Gastón Silva. Again, CL Merlo, you can follow him on Twitter. That's the man who broke this story. And we'll be back tomorrow, I believe, as long as there's no breaking news. Tomorrow's episode will be about Leo Campana and Robert Taylor and whether Inter Miami should trade them, why they're being suggested in trade negotiations or conversations, rumors, etc., and why Inter Miami might want to trade them, and then also why Inter Miami might not want to trade them. So check it out. That'll come out tomorrow. And other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day.